Mac and Perry in the place. Da-na-na-na. Mac and Perry go live to create. Da-na-na-na. Mac and Perry invite you to stay.
Welcome to TELUS Storyhive's On Location here in Medicine Hat at Unlimited Characters Bookstore. I'm Michael.
I'm Pam Robertson Rivet.
Great, yeah. Thanks so much for meeting with us, Pam. I'm really excited to hear about your creative practice and learn all about you.
My journey to becoming a writer started in school. And I loved writing. I thought it was really fun. I liked looking at my handwriting. And in the 6th grade, my teacher came to me and said he wanted me to ghostwrite a story. And I said, ghostwrite a story? What is that? I'd never heard that expression before. And so he explained that you write a story and your name's not on it and other people can read it. And he was collecting material for teaching with. And so I ghost wrote this story and it triggered some thoughts about writing. And it was a long time before I came back to writing, but that stayed with me. And so when I first started writing for pay, I was creating instructional materials for a company in Nova Scotia and basically ghostwriting, creating course material and writing case studies and just doing all kinds of stuff that was fulfilling that start from the 6th grade to many years later. And I enjoy writing a lot. I like to grab a cup of tea in the morning and I sit down at my computer and I have a look at what my goals are for that day in terms of what I need to write. And then I start plugging away at it and take a break and get some more tea and get outside for a little while and then get back to it. So I can write essentially all day off and on working on a specific project.
It sounds like you got a great process going on. That's great. Yeah, I want to go back, all the way back, why not? To that, yeah, the 6th grade, that's really interesting. So your teacher approaches you to be a ghost writer. Do you remember like what the story was about? It was a fictional story, I assume?
It was a fictional story and I was writing on foolscap paper. So in those days, we actually were in an experimental classroom. We were in an open area beside the library, and there were 3 6th grade classes around this large square. So it was quite a noisy, interesting, very creative space, actually. And so when he asked me to ghostwrite this story for a language arts project, and it would be a fiction story, had to have a beginning and a middle and an end, and that was really the only criteria. And I think it needed to fit on 3 foolscap sheets of paper, which is 8.5 by 14 inches for people that aren't familiar with that. And yeah, I got to write this story and it was fun. I don't remember what it was about. I have no idea how long he used it for, but yeah. Yeah,
it just seems like a very unique opportunity as a young person and for that really, teacher to see your potential there.
Yeah, it was really an exciting kind of start to things.
And like at what point, so then you said you did more of that like technical writing, again as a ghost writer. How old would you have been at that point in your life?
So I had my kids first and then I went to university and did an education degree. And I didn't know what I wanted to do after that because there weren't a lot of teaching jobs. So I continued with university, did a master's degree in counseling, and then I did a doctorate in what they call interdisciplinary studies, which means you can do everything or anything. I was looking for work at one time and this company was looking for writers to create courseware for early educational software. And I applied and got the job and learned a whole bunch more about being an instructional designer and how to lay things out so that people are learning from what you're presenting. And yeah, so that started in about 2008 that I started doing instructional design, and I finished that up after 15 years. So I did that for 15 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Quite a while, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting type of work because I got to learn everything I was writing about. I wrote a lot of what they call soft skills courses, so things about communication skills, leadership, supervision, career design. What else did we do? Training, like to help adults working in a corporate workspace who were designated trainers, then they would have the information they needed. So there was a whole mixture of things, and I wrote nearly 200 courses working for them.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really good.
Many questions about that and some other things, but I think I'll go with my first train of thought. Along with that work you were doing, what comes to mind is like, I think of like a an author, and we'll talk about your fiction writing and other areas of interest. But I feel like with that, especially being like essentially a ghostwriter and writing those courses, like perhaps like you wouldn't get a lot of like reader feedback, or I'm assuming like you maybe wouldn't know how that impacted people. Was that the case, or did you get any sort of?
Sometimes. So we actually taught some of those courses in order to beta test them. So taking them into community. And we also were writing them for translation. So they would be translated into Spanish in particular, and then Arabic at one time. So I wrote a course on customer service that was taught in Oman during a FIFA competition. And those people would give us feedback because culturally you have to be extremely aware of so many things. How do you receive hello from somebody? How do you ask the small stuff? Because a lot of cultures, as Canadians, we're pretty good about the small talk. Hey, how are you doing? Even though you're not really asking, how are you doing? Or thank you, or sorry, or all of those kinds of social cues and nuances. Other countries do not use those in the same sort of manner as we do. We did get some feedback to be able to incorporate those things and make them meaningful, and also to help them entertain clients from other countries in their country.
Oh, that sounds like a great experience. Yeah.
It was, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome, yeah. I just want to go back a little bit with like you've done a lot of education as well. Maybe we can just start with like your ed degree, or if you want to just speak more generally, like how some of the education that you've done, has that influenced your writing?
Absolutely. So when I did my education degree, one of the things that I studied was linguistics, which is the study of language and how it's constructed and how it goes together. And I was also studying how to teach English as a second or supplementary language. So that's something that, especially early on, was a background for a lot of the writing that I was doing. And even the fiction writing now, I sometimes look at it and think, okay, maybe I can simplify that a little bit, or maybe I can make that a little more satisfying for somebody who's reading, whose background is not English. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes there are Canadian isms that I want in my stories that go in there and are left for people maybe to think about or talk about later, or send me an email. Yeah.
Oh, great. Anything from like your counseling education, like listening, or I don't know?
Yeah. The listening. The counseling was very much focused on careers. So I'm always asking people, oh, what are you doing with that? Like when I met you guys today and we were talking about your backgrounds, and I'm always thinking about how people can make a living at whatever they're doing. Is it fulfilling for them? Are they excited by it? Because we've become much more focused on, are people satisfied in their work, or are they going to work to make a living and gaining satisfaction maybe from a hobby or something else?
Oh yeah, that's all very applicable. Absolutely, yeah. Nice. Okay, so we'll go back to, so you, for 15 years you were doing that, the course writing. Yeah, I guess your journey as a writer. What came next?
I won a publishing prize. So while I was doing all that fiction or nonfiction writing, I finished my doctorate in interdisciplinary studies. I had developed a couple of things that I thought, these should really be in a book. And I went to a conference and I won this publishing prize, and I thought, oh cool, there's the book. So the book was called Live Inspired, and it's a manual for adults to do the career counseling pieces maybe that they never got. And that really got me thinking about self-publishing and what the opportunities are for that. And I had started building a novel in the back of my head, and I finally had time to write it because I was finished that PhD. And so I started writing what eventually became Maggie's Song, which is a novel that stands on its own. And then there was this huge fire in northern Alberta, and that started feeding the spy series in the back of my head, because we never really knew what started that fire. But what could have started that fire? What was the potential for that? And this character that also was really heavily on my mind.
Tell me about the process of writing those books. I guess let's start with the first one. What was that like?
That was really fun. And so I had been so busy with so much of the nonfiction work and the instructional design. And in my free time, I was writing like scenes and little snippets and little ideas of things that I thought these really need to go in a book. And so I just started building. And I wanted a character who was a very strong woman, but also maybe a little bit relatable for people who are also in my circles. So she's in her mid-40s. She drinks too much. She works and has worked as a spy for her whole career. So she really doesn't know sometimes some of the social things or some of the other nuances we look at. But she's curious about things and she's interested in things. And because of her age, she's also in perimenopause. So she sweats at unbelievable times and deals with some of those things throughout the course of that story. And she gets into trouble and she makes decisions she might make differently if they weren't so rushed, you know?
No, yeah, sounds great. Yeah. And it sounds like you very much either had an idea ahead of time or know your audience. That's the people you wanted to reach, right?
Yeah. And I surveyed some of my friends too to ask them, because at that time when I was working on that, there were these big tomes that were coming out by George R.R. Martin or Diana Gabaldon. They're massive reads that take a real commitment to get through. And I thought, okay, do I put all of her into one book? And the people that I was surveying said, no, I need a quick read. I want a few hours and then I have to move on to other things. So I created it as a series. And you can read each book on its own. You don't have to read the whole series, but there is a flow and a continuity through the overarching story through the whole series.
You talked about you were interested initially with like self-publishing. Yeah, I guess what's that experience been like for you to, I assume, self-publish your books?
It's been quite an adventure because the business skills that have to come along with that were things that I hadn't done before. I'd worked on contract for a long time, so I knew how to do a lot of that stuff. But when you're self-publishing and you're responsible for finding the editorial team, you're responsible for the marketing, you're responsible for ultimately the cover design. So the first covers that I had for those books actually couldn't be advertised on some of the book sites because I had a very common Canadian pistol and a passport. And that gun, they won't put on things like Apple Books from an independent publisher. Some of the big writers do have those things on their covers. So there was all kinds of learning, and there was a couple of podcasts actually that I watched that taught a lot, or listened to at that time, that taught a lot about the self-publishing aspect, how to do advertising. Like you have to become a book publisher in addition to creating a really compelling story that people are going to want to pick up.
So you wrote Maggie's Song, you have Border Pieces, there was 4 in that series. You wrote that over a number of years. Yeah, I guess so your writing journey, I guess what came next?
COVID, actually. And the last 2 books in the series came out during that period of time. And I wasn't doing any of the instructional design work. So I had a lot more time to dive into the creativity of writing and really broaden my scope as a writer. And we had moved here to Medicine Hat by then. And I connected with a book club here, a writer's club, that was really nice to have that community. And because writing is very isolated, you normally are in your house or in your basement, or some people will go to a coffee shop. And of course, for me, I'm very happy writing at home. I have my favorite mug, I have my teapot or whatever going on. And so that period of time was very isolating. So having the writers club and people all of a sudden to talk to and ask about, hey, what are you working on? Or somebody emails you a chapter and says, I'm stuck. Can you have a look at this? That's always really fun.
Did any new ideas come out of that group that you were throwing around?
I wouldn't say new ideas. Really what we focus on is sharing our writing and looking at what we're learning as human beings and what we take from the human kind of experience and bring into our writing. That's a big part of it for me. I love to people watch, and I love to chat with people and find out what's their life like and what's happening today or what's going on. My husband and I chuckle all the time because I'll say to him, oh, what's going on with so-and-so? Maybe somebody at work went on a trip or they've had a grandchild or something like that. And he'll say, I don't know, because they don't ask each other that kind of stuff. And so I'm more likely to go up to somebody and say, it's really wonderful to see you. What happened with something? And I don't know if that's partly my background through the counseling and the connecting there, or it's because I'm writing and I'm curious, because I can then draw a little thing and say, can I use that in my book? Because I'd really love to use that in my book. And there are a lot of real events that are within these books that are taken maybe out of the news and changed a little bit, or we had some great skeletons in my family closet. And during the pandemic, especially, my husband and I were doing a lot of ancestry and genealogy research. So you take a little glimmer over there, like when you're diving into military records of soldiers that went here or there, and then you read the records and you find out they got thrown into the brig for a couple of days because they reached around a corner and stole a beer bottle. Like just things that are real, actual things. I love pulling things out of the old newspapers. So I have a subscription to newspapers.com because they put every detail in their newspaper stories. When you read those old newspapers and maybe there's a court case or something going on, like absolutely every detail is in there. Whereas now, there's maybe a couple of lines. Even the old obituaries, they link you to every person in that family, who they were, where they lived, how much money was in their estate. There's so much interesting information when you read somebody's died and they had 17 pounds, because these were a lot of English stories, in their bank account. What happened with that? It's such a tiny detail that then you can use and expand on and just have some fun. So.
I wanted to talk about, so along that research and history side, I understand like part of your writing practice has more recently involved the history of the World Wars and quilting. Maybe tell me a bit about that.
So I served in the military. A lot of members in my family served, and partly it was doing the genealogy and looking at what's there. And then I also quilt. And I started out quilting for veterans and making quilts for people who'd been injured as a part of their service. And that sort of connected me to this history that we have of volunteering and quilting and providing comfort to people. And then I found out how many quilts that Canadians had made, especially during the Second World War, because we were counting them very carefully at that point, and all of the other things that were sent from Canada to Britain, mainly, during the war. And there was a research group that was involved in, they had found some of the Second World War quilts that were like 80 years old that they'd been collecting and stuff, and they wanted to return them to Canada. So I got involved in helping make some of those connections and telling the stories of these quilts, because my dad was a kid during the Second World War and he had one of those quilts. And so he had some great stories about being 6 years old and in the war, and they weren't just getting quilts, they got his first long pants at that time. So all of these stories are coming at me and I wanted to record them and save them. And then I started looking at Canadian women and their experience during that time, because one of the trivia question answers was Billy Bishop. And Billy Bishop was a famous Canadian World War I flying ace. Pretty remarkable history. But his wife is the standout for me. And so I did some research on her because she had coordinated the making of a fundraising quilt during the Second World War. And her ability to sell the tickets for that quilt and raise interest was helped along by her husband, partly, because he was flying back and forth to England and collecting names to put in this quilt. So Winston Churchill's signature is in that quilt, Bing Crosby, a whole bunch of entertainers, Lucille Ball, and Margaret Bishop gathered these signatures and had them embroidered for this quilt. And she was the granddaughter of Timothy Eaton, who was the founder of the Eaton's stores. And so they toured when it took 2 years to make that quilt. And then they toured it across Canada selling tickets on it to raise money. And then I just love this part of the story. The lady who won that quilt would charge her friends money to come to her house so they could see it. And that was another way to raise money for the war effort. So That was the biggest, most successful quilt fundraiser of that period of time. But people aren't aware of that stuff. And the quilt actually hangs in a museum in Winnipeg because that's where the lady lived who won the quilt. And I just wish more people knew about it because it connects them to a piece of history. And that's part of what I'm writing about too. And I go tell those stories at historical societies or legions or groups of quilters or whoever wants to hear it, because it's just a way of bringing that history alive for people. And when they hear about some of the people who signed that quilt, they're like, oh, really? That's cool. Who was that person? And it also fascinated me that, like many Canadian women who do things, she died in obscurity. Billy Bishop, her husband, died quite young, and she remarried and developed emphysema and died in Bermuda. So I had reached out to her grandkids to let them know I was researching this quilt and what I wanted to do, and they didn't know that piece of her history. It's just cool to bring that alive for them too and say, now for your kids, this is what one of your ancestors has done and how cool it was, because they all know who Billy Bishop was, and now they know a little bit about her.
Yeah, I can tell you're very passionate about it. Yeah. And I love that you're bringing that part of the Second World War and maybe the First World War history to life that, people maybe wouldn't have thought of. And it sounds like when you described like Margaret's blanket, that's like a big deal if you're like touring this thing around. And if I remember correctly, like it sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's money, right?
Yeah, exactly. When you look at it in today's money, it was like $250,000 worth of tickets.
Yeah.
And now, if we're raffling a quilt somewhere, we're lucky if we can make $1,500 or $2,000 worth of tickets. So yeah, it's an incredible achievement.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. And I think you understand, like you mentioned, I think, but like you're going around and talking about this project and educating people about that. Yeah, tell me a bit about that.
This year is the 85th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. So there was a little bit of a bump in interest from people to learn about what actually happened. What am I supposed to learn from that? So historical societies, museums will sometimes put on presentations. And so if they have me, so I drove up to places like Grand Prairie and the Battlefords in Saskatchewan to be able to share those stories and let people know. And I did lots online over Zoom and things like that too, to be able to just feed the curiosity from people because they want to know. And at certain times, so I'm saying this is the 85th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, and it continues into next year because some Canadians are very familiar that victory in Europe was commemorated this year, but the victory in Japan actually is next spring. So it continues on for a little bit. A lot of Canadians don't have a lot of connections with the Japan connection other than internments here in Canada. But for people in England, there were family members. I lost a grandfather, but there's also a Canadian woman who was a prisoner of war because she volunteered with the Australian Red Cross. And so the Australian Red Cross was in Singapore when it was invaded, and she ended up in this converted jail. And so there are some marvelous stories about her too, that she's a remarkable woman.
Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation, Pam, and looking forward to the showcase.
I'm Daniel J. Perryman, and I'm so excited to dive into some of your pieces more specifically and intimately. And so I think let's just dive into the first piece, which is from Board of Pieces, this one. And yeah, this is the first book in the series. And we're gonna start with the outside of the books before we dive inside. And yeah, you made the artwork for these, is that right?
Yeah, so when I initially wrote the books, I had an artist who created the covers for me, and then we found out some of the elements couldn't be put onto books that were for sale too easily, so I changed it up.
Yeah, and can you tell me a little bit about that process of switching it up and coming to these ones? And I'll go through them here, but were any of them more difficult than others? Like, they're all quite thematically tied together.
They are, and they're skylines that are pulled out of the cities that are featured within the books. I had done a graphic design series of courses that helped me work within Adobe Illustrator for most of them, and Photoshop, and just had fun pulling them together and creating something new and different because we couldn't use what was old.
Yeah. Yeah. And from that self-publishing perspective, what is that having control over that and autonomy, right? Being able to potentially take the time to do that and develop these. Was there anything unique about that part of it, or?
It's amazing how fast it can happen when you are self-publishing it. So if you go through traditional publishing process, the lead time is long. It can be a year or 2 years before you see your book. Whereas when there's a problem, and it's the same if there's a typo on the inside, you can go into it and just update it, and it's done. It's done very efficiently, as long as you remember how to use the software.
We've bookmarked a little piece here, and so I'll just give a read of a little bit.
Sure.
See how it sounds, and just talk about that. It's a good thing I like you, or I'd have to hit you, Morgan said, rubbing her arm at the end of her second session with Rebecca. That hurts like hell. The petite physiotherapist looked at her. I see this all the time, honey. Someone gets surgery, and the doctor says great. It all looks fine. They want you to rest so your stitches and all that stay together. And then the physio you start with is gentle. With your injury, where the blood had nowhere to go and flooded all that tissue in your forearm, you've got a much bigger problem. Rebecca was not a just out of school physiotherapist like the one that Morgan consulted in Canada. She was close to Morgan's age, early 40s, and tough as hell. Awesome, I'll leave it there. Yeah, so what can you tell me about those characters that are in here? We've got Morgan, Rebecca, the physiotherapist.
So Morgan is a spy.
Yes.
And she gets shot. It's a horrible event that takes place. She gets shot. She's in actually northern Canada when that happens. I won't let too much out of the bag there.
Sure.
But she goes to Ireland for a little bit of rest and recuperation, and that's where she meets Rebecca, who's used to treating some of these folks who have dangerous jobs, and she just doesn't put up with anything. So she really gives Morgan as good as Morgan is giving her to make sure that Morgan's actually moving this arm and regaining full use of the arm and is able to go back to her job, because if she doesn't recover properly, not just her living is at stake, but her life, like her passion for what she does. She tries to retire as a spy a couple of times and completely fails at it. She's got to get back on board.
Yeah. And what is that, just because I know very little about writing in this format, so what is that, creating the dialogue between these people, is that where it starts for you, or does it start with the idea of the person and their background, and how does that look for you?
It's a really mixed bag.
Okay.
So I think for some things, I want to convey a feeling or emotion, and so that comes more as the background bits, but I cut a lot of that out of the writing if I can get it in the dialogue. The story is much faster paced for people if there's dialogue and action taking place, and the slower stuff just takes place in my head.
Nice. And then what is it like weaving in these stakes and like those story plot points of what happens, and what does that look like for you, weaving those things in and together?
For me, I find that really easy. I read a lot. And that's one of the things that we stress for new writers is read a lot. So you can see how well other writers do that and how much more engaging the book is when you can do that. So you can, I have deliberately sat there with a sheet to say, okay, here this is happening. This has got to be a crisis. This has got to be some kind of resolution point, to deliberately make sure that the reader stays in the story. I had the arc figured out until about book 3, because originally it was going to be a 3-book series, and there were just so many fun opportunities to create a 4th book, and I had introduced a dog by then, so I wanted to really play with the dog side of it. But yeah, you have to, or for me, I had to have it coordinated. So I use a couple of pieces of writing software to help me keep track of all that and keep track of the characters and attributes, like how long is their hair, what color are their eyes, or what have you, so that I don't lose touch on anything. I don't want somebody to start out being 5'7" and a brunette and at some point changing them to be 5'10" and a redhead.
I know there's plenty more that we could dive into in that series alone, but we have quite a few things to touch on. So our next thing that we're going to touch on is Maggie's song. Can you just give me a broad overview of this piece again before we dive inside?
Maggie is a young woman that gets her heart broken. She's out on Vancouver Island for a summer course. She's in the military and she's out there for a music course, which if anybody knows me, that sounds familiar. That's because, yeah, that's where I started, with something very familiar, but to create a fun story. She gets her heart broken. She meets somebody else and he's falling madly in love with her, but she's about to leave from the course and being out there all summer, and he wants to know how she feels.
I know in your interview with Michael, you talked about being curious about people and hearing their stories and experiences and politely asking if you can use those and obviously tweak them a bit, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Did any of that occur in this book? Can you recall?
There is a little bit because of the work that she's doing, and also when I was in the military as a young 20-year-old, there's all kinds of relationships being formed. That you've got young people meeting each other, they're having intense periods of working together, so they're also falling in love and doing all of those things. So yeah, some of that fills that for sure.
Nice. Okay, we'll dive in here. They had driven out to the lagoon near the Fisgard lighthouse and were feeding the ducks that were also out that early in the morning. "How are you feeling about us?" he asked quietly. "I'm feeling really good about us," she said, looking over at him. "Why do you ask?" "What I really mean is, I need to tell you that I really like you, and I am wondering if you are leaving at the end of the summer and leaving me completely, or can we try to keep things going like they are, but in a long-distance kind of way?" he asked nervously. Her heart went out to him. "I'm not sure what to do, to be honest. I have another year of school. Your job takes you away a lot. Some people say long-distance relationships are really tough, and others say they can work if you really love each other. I've been avoiding thinking about it because I'm really not sure how to handle it." You get the sense of what you're talking about if it can come out through dialogue, because there's very little in here that is, there's the "he asked nervously," like there's a bit of indicating what the emotion might be, but really trying to capture their emotional state, where they are in the story through the dialogue. And yeah, it's quite intimate, like in this one specifically. And so what comes to mind for me there is just that idea of like, how many times do you reread these things? Or do you get numb to that at some point? Or is there feedback that reminds you like, oh, like this is the core of that scene or that part of the story? I think you can get numb to it because when you're reading your own work, you don't see the mistakes, or you see too many nuances that a reader may not get. And so my practice around that is to put it away for a couple of days. I know other writers that like to send it to what they called their alpha readers or their beta readers. I'm not really in that practice. That kind of came along more recently than I got into it. I'll put it away for a couple of days. I'll maybe have one person that I'm very close to read stuff and see what they think. And I also look at sort of other types of writing. If you read Maeve Binchy or Charles Dickens, they got a lot of words in their writing. There's a lot going on. And I'm more likely to let the reader form their ideas about that and let the dialogue drive it. The essential stuff is written in there, but I like the dialogue driven, because to me then I can form a picture in my head and it's like I'm watching a movie, but I'm reading it out of the book. And my dad reads a lot, and one of the things he says is that the way that he imagines it, or the way somebody might imagine this, is going to be different from the next person, different from the way that you actually imagine it in your head.
Yeah.
And I think that's really beautiful, and that you're able to provide people with that opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah, it creates a different experience for everybody. Yeah.
And I didn't do this before we dived in, but the cover, was there a specific inspiration behind this? What was the choice?
This is the Fisgard Lighthouse. So you were reading about the Fisgard Lighthouse. It's the oldest lighthouse in Western Canada. It's still there on the coast of the west coast, just outside of Victoria, in a place called Esquimalt, which is where the naval base is there. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. Very cool. Awesome. We'll move swiftly along to something that I believe is like in limbo-esque territory right now, at
Sure
least.
is.
And so, yeah, that's finding felicity. What can you tell us currently about that piece? Yeah.
So I thought I would print Finding Felicity with a new printer to see, as a Canadian author, can I get a really good publishing and distribution experience going on that's maybe different than what we've been doing for the past 10, 15 years. And it's in limbo. So the files were all loaded up. I've been in touch with the printer to say, like, where's the book? What's going on? So this story is another strong female lead. She decides she's going to use a dating site. So her name's not actually Felicity, but her name on the dating site is Felicity. And she gets into all kinds of trouble. It's actually the first one that I've done that's not based in Canada. She lives in Seattle because I thought it might be fun to broaden horizons that way. I did release it as a novella to my newsletter list 2 Christmases ago because I love to have a new Christmas story. And I thought, okay, I'm going to release it in book form so I can have it here at the bookstore. I can take it to book signings. And it's just not here yet. But it's coming. Yeah.
And 2 of the things that stand out to me in there are, yeah, writing in Seattle somewhere. I'm curious if you have experience there or if you're just broadening your horizons, like you say. Do you have thoughts on that right away? Or?
I do, because I know I connect better when I write about places I've been. So I try to have been to every place that I write about. I love Seattle. It's just a funky, eclectic kind of place. There's so much going on. And so it seemed like a perfect place to set her story. But there are places that I have not been in some of my stories, like Russia and Ukraine, which are in the Spy series. I haven't been there. I'll get there one day.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I feel like there's some discussion among writer circles sometimes about the setting being an additional character. And I feel like I can write about the setting if I've been there and I can feel it. There's scenes in Border Pieces in Halifax where it's raining and it blows sideways and all this stuff. And yeah, I lived there, so I understand that. And it's fun to write about that way too.
Nice. I do think that is the time that we have. So I really appreciate you sharing your work with us and insight into your process and just getting to know you a bit. So thank you so much for your time and energy.
Oh, this was really fun. I really appreciate meeting both of you, and it's been a great experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This has been TELUS Storyhive's On Location in Medicine Hat at Unlimited Characters. I'm Daniel J. Perryman.
Pam Robertson Rivet saying bye for now.
Thank you.
If you or someone you know has a story to tell, scan this QR code and get in touch with the Storyhive On Location team.